Greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York. It's a beautiful fall day here in Cooperstown, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. And we're very glad that all of you could join us for our latest virtual program. Today, it's Virtual Voices of the Game. We are going to talk about the history of the Negro Leagues with two of the leading experts on that subject matter, Larry Lester and Gary Ashwill, both joining us today. Via field trip Zoom, we'll talk about a number of issues related to Negro League's history. It's still making news. Will continue to make news for many years. And we'll get into all of that with Larry and Gary momentarily. Before I officially welcome them both on, I want to just give you some background on both of these gentlemen. Larry is somebody we've gotten to know real well here at the Hall of Fame. He's been here many times. He was one of the co-founders of the Negro League's Baseball Museum, serves as chairman of the Society for American Baseball Research's Negro League Research Committee, and he has authored and contributed to numerous, and I do mean numerous, books over the years. Also joining us is Gary Ashwell, first time that we've had a chance to talk to Gary. He is the founder of Seamheads.com, a terrific Negro Leagues database. He's an author, researcher, historian, not only on the Negro Leagues, but also minor league and Cuban baseball. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. We really do appreciate you taking the time. How are you both doing? Let's begin with Larry.
Well, first of all, thank you, Bruce, and the Baseball Hall of Fame for inviting me. And I'm doing well on this cold, rainy day.
Oh, you're cold and rainy. You're in Kansas City, right?
Yes, I am, sir.
All right, so not ideal baseball weather there. I'll tell you, we've had a beautiful fall here. Not to get too far off into a weather tangent, but it is in the 70s today in mid-October, and that is almost unheard of. Gary, how about yourself? Tell us where you are residing and how you've been.
Well, I live in Durham, North Carolina, so home of the Durham Bulls. So I am doing fine. This has been quite a year ever since, especially since December, when the Negro Leagues were recognized by MLB, and doing great. I'm very busy. So yeah. So. And our weather
is a good thing, no question about that. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the projects that these two gentlemen are involved with. As I said, Larry has done a number of books. Here are two of the more recent ones, From Rube to Robinson. That is one that you edited. And then also the Negro Leagues book, Volume 2. Larry, if you would, tell us just a little bit about these books.
Well, the first book, Rube to Robinson, is a collection of the best articles published by the Sabre community. And we take it all the way from the beginning with the grandfather of Black baseball, Rube Foster, to Jackie Robinson, who broke the color barrier in 1947. The other book, the Negro Leagues book, Volume 2, is a continuation of work that Dick Clark and I did back in the early 90s. It's basically an encyclopedia, just focusing on the players and not the teams, because it's only 500 pages long. So we had to exclude the teams to get all the information in that we have about the players. And you'll find their all-star records, their World Series records, a register of each ball player, the years that he played and the teams that he played for. You find burial information, cemeteries, military information, a lot of trivia. And it's all compacted into this one book, the Negro Leagues book. Highly recommended. There's nothing like it out there. It's the only baseball encyclopedia about the Negro Leagues available.
My understanding, Larry, is that as you folks continue to research the Negro Leagues, you, in a sense, discover players that you didn't know played in the league, and then you find out about them and then add them to the register.
Well, that's an understatement, as Gary knows. Sometimes the box scores do not list their first name, and maybe years later we find the first name, and we have to update the register. Sometimes we have players who played under fictitious names, and then we have to combine those two players into one player. It's an ongoing challenge that I love doing. It keeps me up at night. We want the record to be accurate. And those are challenges that Gary and I have on a day-to-day basis. And I think we love what we do.
Yeah. So finding formal rosters, not very easy.
No, we just man all the newspapers until we come across some rosters. Sometimes we find a roster in a collection, along with uniform numbers, which are listed in this book. That was inspired by a visit to the Hall of Fame one year when I asked your chief librarian what was the most requested research question. And she said uniform numbers. I was somewhat shocked. So I include a section in this book to include all the uniform numbers that I've compiled from rosters in this edition of the Negro Leagues book, Volume 2.
Great stuff. Must have for those that really love the Negro Leagues or diehard fans, but maybe even more casual fans that want to learn a little bit more about the rich history of the Negro Leagues. For Gary, your priority, I guess, among others, is running the very fine Seamheads.com website, a database of Negro Leagues statistics, history. In addition to stats, there are many articles that are featured there. And back in the late spring, you announced, you and Baseball Reference announced an agreement in which basically Seamheads would be providing updated statistics to Baseball Reference so that they can really fulfill this mission of making Negro League statistics and Major League statistics one of a kind, one thing.
Yeah, that was a huge thing because obviously, like everybody else, I use Baseball Reference and I've used it for years. So, and they've used material from me before, but I think this effort to really make the Negro Leagues, part of the Major Leagues, make them, considered Major Leagues and present them as such, is a huge thing. And I was really happy to, to get involved in that. So, yeah, they're using our data and we will be updating it, consistently. So they'll have everything that we have. And I like the way they present it visually. I think it looks great. They do things that we don't do on our website because we don't have Major League stats on our site. We just focus on the players from the Negro Leagues and from Latin American leagues. So it's great that on Baseball Reference, you can check out things like career leaders and to see where, that right now, actually, I think Oscar Charleston is listed as the second highest career batting average behind Ty Cobb, and players like Turkey Stearns and Mule Suttles and others are listed along there too, and also in leaders for career on-base percentage and slugging percentage and so on. And it's great to have that there, and also to have somebody like Jackie Robinson, Minnie Mignoso, players like that who went on to make the transition from the Negro Leagues to the majors to look at their whole careers and see the whole thing. I think that's a great resource. Or somebody like Satchel Paige, whose career Major League career looks very different now with the addition of the Negro Leagues. So so it's a great development, I think, at Baseball Reference.
Gary, some fans who might be tuning into this subject for the first time, they might be saying, what do you mean by updated statistics? We haven't had Negro Leagues baseball, in any form since the early 60s and since its heyday in the 1940s. Why are we updating the statistics? Why are they changing?
Well, that goes back to the whole history of the Negro Leagues themselves and the fact that for many reasons, complete statistics were never really published at the time. There was no central clearinghouse. There was no equivalent of, say, the Sporting News that collected every single thing. There were the Black Weekly newspapers are probably the most important source for information on Black baseball, but because they were mostly published weekly through the era that we're talking about, they would have maybe 2-3 sports pages to devote to everything. And that meant, baseball was the biggest sport, but you also had boxing, which is big. You also had college football, which is really important. You had basketball. So they had to cover everything in 2 or 3 pages. So in the 20s, And into the 30s, it was very important, to get baseball box scores were a big part of your sports coverage in any paper. It's just a huge portion of like the page, that you'll find. That becomes less common in the 30s and 40s. But even so, like they wanted to squeeze in as many box scores as possible, but there was just no way to get everything covered. It was just not possible. So that means that you start with the black weekly newspapers, but you're going to get, even in the 1920s, you might get maybe 50% of the games that were played, something like that. And you got to look at multiple ones, like the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier, for example. I mean, they have the names of those cities in their titles, but they were distributed nationally. So they were really national newspapers, and they tried to cover things nationally. The Pittsburgh Courier was more interested in the East Coast, but they had a lot of coverage of what was going on in the Midwest. Chicago Defender was more interested in the Midwest, but they had a lot of coverage of what was going on in the East. They tried to be comprehensive as possible. And other black weeklies were very important, like the Baltimore Afro-American, the New York Amsterdam News, the Kansas City Call, St. Louis Argus. So you go through all of those and you look at it, you're still not going to get everything because they just couldn't get everything into their single weekly issue. So you then have to go to daily newspapers in the cities where the teams are located. And in the 20s and 30s, you have a lot of box scores that were actually published. They didn't have a lot of coverage of the teams. They weren't that interested in the Negro Leagues per se, but they tended to publish box scores for professional games that were played in their cities. So the Kansas City daily papers, Chicago Tribune Daily, Detroit Free Press, and so on will have, a good number of box scores. So you have to go there. Then you have to go to, because the Negro Leagues played a lot of games in neutral sites. So you have to go track those games down. And sometimes because those are played in smaller cities and smaller towns, game involving Negro League teams is a big deal. These were professionals coming into play. It was the best baseball they'd see all year. So they might have, pretty for the time, pretty lavish coverage, big box score, a long article that goes all the way down, the page. Other towns might just put, a little note, a line score, maybe, if you're lucky, So basically there's no central source, and there never really was. There were some exceptions in the 1940s. There was the Negro Baseball Yearbook was published in 1944 and 1945, and they published complete-ish stats. They didn't list every single player. And there were attempts at publishing league stats various times in the 40s, but it was very inconsistent. So it's not really something that it's not easy to work with that kind of material. So basically our task as, Larry and I and, dozens of other people have over decades have had to go and just track down these things, one game at a time. And we're nearing a point where I think it will be as complete as the existing historical record will allow it to be, but we're not quite there yet. So our website, Seamheads, it's like we've always done that. We started off just covering a few years, and we just gradually added to it and added games to individual years and improved our coverage and corrected things and brought in new players like Larry was talking about, identified new players and so on. So it's always been a project that is, in progress. So that's what I mean by updates.
Yeah. What about a source like the Sporting News? We know they had great major league coverage. Did they cover the Negro Leagues at all?
Not really. No. I mean, you'll find some mentions of things occasionally, but no. Yeah. And
no box scores at all.
No, they were, in my opinion, not considered the Bible of baseball in regard to the Negro League stats. So they didn't deem the Negro League teams as important.
Yeah.
So we did a workaround.
Well, it's amazing what you guys and what other researchers have done to overcome some of these obstacles. Looking back at an era when obviously there was no internet, no digitization, there was not some of the day-to-day source material that helps us follow both Major League and minor league baseball today. Larry, I'm curious about the decision. It was reached, well, it's almost a year ago now. It was announced that this melding of Negro League statistics into the Major League statistics, so they would essentially be considered one and the same. We can see the banner on Baseball Reference. The Negro Leagues are Major Leagues. Were you one of the people that was the driving force behind this? Tell us a little bit about what went into that decision-making process.
Well, Bruce, I've always been an advocate for inclusion of the Negro League stats into Major League Baseball statistical reference volumes, but I'm just one of many people who have pioneered this effort along with Gary Ashwill, Patrick Rock, and Scott Simpkins, and Kevin Johnson, Sean Foreman, and my good friend Wayne Stivers, along with Dick Clark, who really got me going into box score statistical research. So I cannot take credit for moving this needle forward. We have always been advocates for why not include them, for the simple reason that the Negro Leagues played under the same rules that Major League Baseball players did. They used the same baseball during that period, the Wilson C-150. They ordered their bats from the Louisville Slugger factory. They wore the same uniforms, Wilson and Spalding, and of course played under the same rules. And the only difference is the color of their skin. So why not accept them? What's the pushback here? What's the resistance to accept these men of color playing America's national pastime? And so we continue to push that needle forward, and whatever happened, a new awareness maybe by Major League Baseball because of social activists in this country, a new vision to accept black ball stats. I call this social reparation. And I think it's time to correct that omission of black baseball from the annals of American history, not just baseball, but American history.
Yeah. Larry, I'm curious about the resistance that you met. I'm certainly not expecting you to name names, but were there people in the game that said, we shouldn't do this, this isn't right? Did you have to try to counter those arguments?
Well, yes, you try to counter those arguments by showing that they were quality athletes, and you prove statistically that they were the equal, not better, but equally as talented as their white counterparts. And we do this by showing, let's say a Satchel Paige struck out roughly one batter per inning, the same as a Nolan Ryan or a Roger Clemens. We show that Josh Gibson hit so many home runs per at-bat, and we compare those numbers with Babe Ruth. Instead of looking at the color of a person's skin, let's look at his stats. And statistically speaking, because the playing field was level, these players are the equivalent of their white counterparts. I've done statistical studies where I've shown that the league average for the Negro National League, Negro American League, white major leagues, the league average is less than 2% difference when we look at the league average total ERAs, or comparatively speaking, the numbers are the same. Mm-hmm. And my point is there are just as many Negro League players who batted below the Mendoza line as there were white major leaguers. But we get this media coverage where all the players from the Negro Leagues were as great as Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson and Cooper Bell and Turkey Stearns. And that's simply not true. They were the equal across the board. And so it's just the color of their skin that's keeping them out of the Hall of Fame and out of the history book. Simple as that.
Yeah. When you started to delve into the statistics and more statistics became available through the research of the box scores and the newspapers, did it help you develop an even greater appreciation for some of these players? I mean, we know Josh Gibson, Charleston, Page, all fantastic players, but were there some players that you realized, wow, even better than I thought?
Well, yes, the first player that comes to mind is Cannonball Dick Redding, who was contemporary of Smokey Joe Williams, who is in the Hall of Fame. I found 4 doubleheaders where he pitched both games and won 6 of those 8 games. You won't find this in any history book.
Yeah.
There were so many aha moments. Looking at the 14 straight hits, 14 consecutive hits by Rap Dixon.
Wow.
In 1929. That's two more than the major league record. There's so many moments where we look at great ball players like Bullet Rogan, who would win 15 games in a 60-game season and bat cleanup. He was the precursor to Shohei Ohtani. So, we need to incorporate these stats and look at the total picture. And like Gary was saying, the stats are available. Sometimes they're more accurate and more detailed than others, but those stats are available. We have the play-by-play for the 1924 and 1925 Colored World Series. We have the play-by-play for the 1926 no-hitter thrown by Red Greer for the Bacharach Giants. So we need to include Red Greer's no-hitter alongside Don Larson's no-hitter in 56. We need to include Leon Day's opening day no-hitter alongside Bob Feller's no-hitter on opening day in 1940. We're just asking for inclusion, not acceptance. They've always been accepted. We don't need to validate what we already know, just include it in the total picture. And that's what Seamheads.com is doing.
That's fascinating. Certainly I've heard of those names like Leon Day, but didn't know about the no-hitter on opening day. That's very, very interesting. Gary, I want to talk about the flip side. What are some of the difficulties that you, Larry, other researchers face when you do meld Negro League statistics into Major League statistics? Off the bat, I would think one problem is the shortness of the official Negro League season. They played many games out of league. They played many exhibition games during barnstorming trips. So I would think trying to create an equivalent, let's say they played a 60-game season as opposed to 154 or the current 162. I would imagine that's one of the difficulties you face, correct?
Well, sure. I mean, we just report what happened, but the Negro League teams played, a much more complex season than their contemporaries in the white majors. And they played against a lot of different kinds of opponents. So I think the challenge is mostly to try to present this information in a way that's not confusing to people. So that's something we've focused on, games between what we can, black major league teams. We also have on our website, we also have exhibition games involving, between black teams and teams of white major leaguers, and also in some instances high minor league. We have that information as well. And of course all the Latin American leagues that we have too, which are an important part of most or a lot of black ball players' careers in those days. But I think it's for us, it's probably a matter of trying to present it so it's not confusing. I think for folks who are looking at the data, you just have to understand the context, and you have to understand that the seasons are shorter. We don't necessarily have box scores for every game either, so it makes it even, it makes the sample even smaller, unfortunately, in some cases. But that happens in the white major league stats too. Like if you go back into the 19th century, the seasons also get a bit shorter. If you go back to the 1870s, it's more, there are seasons that are more like 60, 72 games, So it's one of those things that I think when you look at it, you just have to keep that in mind. It's true that, the leader lists for counting stats for careers or for seasons for that matter, you're not going to have a lot of, Negro League names, among the leaders, and, just raw numbers of achievements, home runs or, stolen bases or whatever, when you meld the two things together like that. But it's just something that I would say people should, learn about, folks will get used to it, as they look at this material and look at the records of these players.
With the non-counting statistics, I imagine the reverse is true. You'll see some really high batting averages and some really minuscule ERAs.
Yeah, that's true. Chino Smith, for example, hit somewhere around, I think it's, I forget what the exact number we have on there, but it's somewhere, he actually hit somewhere around 400, like as a career average against Black major league teams. But that was in less than 1,000 plate appearances because he unfortunately passed away at a very young age. So it's just, obviously you look at that and you think, you have a smaller sample and you're going to have more chance at, more extreme performances like that. But it's one of those things that you just have to take into account when you look at it.
Yeah. Larry, Gary mentioned something interesting about the games between the Black Stars and the White Stars, these barnstorming matchups that took place. What have you been able to gather through your research in terms of the intensity of these games? Were they given a lot of attention? Were there fights that broke out during these games? I'm really curious. My understanding is that the Black players in general, players like Oscar Charleston, took these games really seriously. Do we know if the White players also approached it in the same way? I'm curious your thoughts on these Black-White matchups.
Well, you have to remember these are the top athletes, and the top athletes won bragging rights. And so you got the best Black ball players, you got the best white ball players competing against each other on the field. And as it turned out to be, the Black teams won between 55 to 60% of the games. The Black teams were pretty heavily loaded with all-stars and probably were a lot more talented man for man than the white teams were. But what we have learned even from that makeup and from working in any environment, diversity creates competition, and competition eliminates mediocrity. And so the lesser talented white ball players are either benched or kicked off the team. And we see that today. We have the best players on the planet and not just the best players from white America. And it makes for a better game, more up-tempo. Pitchers are throwing harder, players are running faster and much more talented than ever before, because the mediocrity has been eliminated because of diversity has been put on these teams. So these interracial matchups drew a large crowd, very well attended. But we look at this at the numbers. In 1934, the Black teams were beating up the Dizzy Dean All-Stars, and in 1946, they beat up the Bob Fella All-Stars more than their fair share. So that tells me that the Black ball players, they brought their A game, and the stats prove that.
Yeah. My understanding was that Oscar Charleston was particularly terrific in these matchups. He hit something like 400 in the games they found statistics for against the white players.
Well, yes, him and Turkey Stearns and Satchel Paige and Hilton Smith were known to strike out their share of ball players, and a lot of underrated, unknown Black ball players excelled in those games. And this is why Gary and I do what we do, to expose these unheralded talents and let people know that there were other ball players besides Page and Gibson and Cool Papa Bell. But, Willie Brown was an outstanding ball player. Newt Allen, superstar. Most people don't know about Newt Allen, the second baseman who played on more championship teams than any player in Negro League history. And he's seldom mentioned. There's so many great stars that have gone unnoticed. I mean, the history of the Negro Leagues is captivating and addictive.
Yeah. You mentioned Satchel Paige. Let's talk a little bit about this being the 50th anniversary of his induction. I, of course, was not working at the Hall of Fame then. I would have been 6 at the time and probably didn't know what the word baseball meant. But here are some photographs from that summer day. It was August of 71. You can see Satchel in the photograph on the left is kind of beaming as he looks at his own plaque. And then you can see on the right, he is at the podium during his induction speech, which actually took place right outside the doors of where I am, right outside the library on the front steps of Cooper Park. Larry, I know you go back a little further than me, but
Yeah.
I don't think you were there that day either. But this obviously was history making. And it was something that, at least in part, was brought about by what Ted Williams had said 5 years earlier, where he kind of put Major League Baseball and the Hall of Fame under the thumb a bit and said it's time to start putting Negro Leaguers in the Hall of Fame. And I guess we start there. How much pull do you think Ted Williams had? How much did those comments influence what occurred beginning in 71?
I think Ted Williams' comments were an awakening. It was a wake-up call for Major League Baseball officials to recognize the greatness of these black ball players in 1971. I would have been there. I was just graduating from college in 1971 and counting my nickels and dimes to get to Cooperstown, which I never made. But I very close to the Paige family. I went to school with his siblings and played basketball with Robert Paige, his oldest son, and
Wow.
Very much involved with the Paige family. But it was a moment of achievement, and I'm glad the National Baseball Hall of Fame finally found an opportunity to recognize Satchel Paige. And the beauty of what we're trying to do today, Gary Ashwell and I, is now we can add the 18 seasons from the Negro Leagues to his major league totals. So that will increase his wins and strikeouts totals significantly. So that's the beauty of inclusion. More recognition for one of the, I consider the greatest pitcher of all time.
Now, initially, this caused controversy because it was announced that Satchel Paige, as the first player to be inducted based on his Negro Leagues accomplishments, would be going into a separate wing. When that came out, a lot of writers, fans, understandably were upset. There was blowback against that. And the commissioner and the Hall of Fame then got together and said, we can't do it that way. We have to have a unified plaque gallery. We have to include Paige in that plaque gallery. And that's how it was done beginning in August of 71. I'm curious, Larry, did you ever have a chance to talk to Satchel, interview him, talk about what it meant for him to finally be appreciated with Hall of Fame enshrinement?
Well, according to his daughter, Pamela, she felt like her dad, that added 10 more years to his life, that recognition. And to answer your question about separate but equal, Sam Lacey, a great writer for the Baltimore African American, said separate but equal. Well, some people are more equal than others.
Yeah.
And he was mentioning that Satchel Paige should be alongside his counterparts, his white counterparts in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. So, yeah, some people are more equal than others.
Yeah. Did you ever talk to Satchel, ever interview him?
No, he was always on the road when I would go by the house.
Yeah.
Because he played, he played Winter League baseball in Latin America, and but he was a great dad. He would always call home and check on the kids, and great father, antique collector, a very intellectual person, despite the persona that he presented to the media as a Stephen Fetchit-like athlete. But he was very intelligent, very knowledgeable, and a world traveler. That's what I found just walking through his home.
He wanted people to think that he wasn't aware, but he was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very astute.
Gary, I'm curious what you've learned about Satchel. I'm pretty sure that you didn't ever have a chance to meet him or interview him.
No.
But I mean, he died, I think, early 1980s. I never had that opportunity either. But what are some of the things that you've learned about Satchel, both as a pitcher and also in terms of that larger than life personality?
Well, one thing, Larry had mentioned this earlier, and this is something that really is one of the first things that really stood out to me when I was starting to really pull a lot of the records together that we have. And that's, his striking out a batter per inning, like Larry said. And the thing about that is that's much more impressive in those days than it is now, because basically no other pitcher in those days was able to sustain that over a whole career like that. And he did. He's still doing it in the 1940s. It's astonishing. So, and along with, a great control record that was also like pretty much the equal of the best control pitchers in the Negro Leagues. So it's incredible. And his strikeout to walk ratios is amazing. And he really stands out whenever you look at pitchers in those leagues. Like, he really does stand out. He's just, there are a few who could come, like a Slim Jones or someone like that could come along every so often and be close to him, but nobody could ever really surpass him during his career. And he was always, from the late 20s, like through the 40s, he was always at the top of his profession. Another thing about it is that his, if you look at the record that we've got, and that's a Baseball Reference, it's not, even for an Negro League player, it's a little bit broken up because he was so much in demand that he was hired away for, and was able to get jobs in all sorts of places. For example, going to Bismarck, North Dakota to play independent baseball on an integrated team in 1935, along with several other Black stars. He was shipped around the country to play sort of one game stands for various teams at various times. He was loaned to teams. He was loaned to the Black Yankees to play basically one game. And there are all these photographs of that around now in the 40s. So that's another thing. We even given the work that we've done to recover his record, it still is only a partial representation of everything he did, because he was all over the place and playing for all kinds of teams and doing all sorts of things that, and some of which just went unrecorded.
Bruce, I'd like to add some value to what Gary had to say about Satchel Paige. The biggest day for a Negro League team was Sunday. And so I've run some queries to show what pitcher started the most games on Sunday. And it was Satchel Paige, all by a large margin. Wow. That was a big payday. And Satchel Paige was always on the mound just about every Sunday. So we can run those statistics like that to show someone's greatness. Who pitches on opening day? What catcher catches the most no-hitters? These are all things that are available now that Gary and I have put this data into a database. We can run filters and queries that spit out numbers that have never been shared before.
We hear all these stories about Satchel Paige, the quotations that have been attributed to him. This happened similarly with Yogi Berra. And I think in a lot of cases, Yogi probably didn't say all the things he supposedly said. Yeah. Was that the case with Satchel? Were these quotations, were they made up, exaggerated? This larger than life personality, was that accurate, or is that perhaps a little bit exaggerated? What do you think? Either one of you.
I think Satchel Paige and Yogi Berra were kindred spirits. Paige was known to embellish a few things, like, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? So he played to the media. And, he always walked slow to the mound to give that shuffling appearance, and never get in a hurry. He had the media in his hands. So I love Paige and some Yogi Berra.
Yeah. One last thing on Satchel Paige, and it doesn't have to do with his Negro Leagues career, but I think it's still incredible. He pitches in a game for the Kansas City Athletics, who were a pretty bad team at the time. Charlie Finley brings him in September of '65 to start a game against the Boston Red Sox. He is 59 years of age, making him the oldest player to ever appear in a game in the American League or National League, and he shuts out the Red Sox for 3 innings. And I have to think the Red Sox were trying just as hard against him as they would have against anybody else. To me, that is remarkable.
Well, I went to that game.
Wow.
Yeah, September 25th, 1965. And from what I saw, he had excellent control. Unfortunately, he fell behind in the count with Carl Yastrzemski. And that's when Carl doubled off the wall. But that was the only hit he gave up in those 3 innings. And then he came out for the 4th inning, and the manager came out to the mound to let him know that a relief pitcher was coming in. So everybody stood up and clapped and, cheered for him to leave the mound. And I think it was only maybe 11,000 people in the stands that day. I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
But I was there, and I remember those memories like it was yesterday. It was a grand time for me. It's because of him and his family that baseball is a part of my DNA. It was a great ball game.
And Larry, no doubt in your mind that what he did was legitimate. The Red Sox didn't treat this like an exhibition game, right?
Oh, they were playing hard. I think they won the game eventually, but they were baffled by his change of speed, pitches, and you could tell they were actually trying to play hard. And I've interviewed everybody on that team, and they were saying, yeah, we just couldn't hit the old man.
Yeah. Great pictures from that day. He had a rocking chair, I believe, in the bullpen.
Yeah.
There was a nurse pretending to take care of him before the game.
Yeah.
Charlie Finley really played it up, and Satchel went along, but he did pitch 3 shutout innings in that start against Boston. Would have been a perfect opener in today's game of baseball. One of the things I want to do over our last 15 minutes or so is talk about some of the underrated stars of the Negro Leagues, players that might now receive more recognition in a couple of areas, because the record keeping or the records that we're finding are becoming more comprehensive, but also because we have this Hall of Fame ballot coming up in December. It's the early baseball era. They'll be voting in early December. Committee will take a look at not only Negro Leagues players, but also players from the major leagues pre-1950. And this will be, I guess, going back to the 19th century as well. So we wanted to look at some players. We don't know yet if they're going to be on the ballot. We don't know if any of these players will be elected, but this at least gives us a snapshot at some possible names that we might be hearing about. And I'd like to get both your thoughts on each of these players that we talk about. Now, one of you had mentioned Rap Dixon earlier. Here we see him with the Hilldale Giants. I believe, Larry, you had said that Rap had 14 consecutive at-bats with hits, which is pretty amazing. Give us, if you will, Larry, an overall scouting report. What kind of player was Rap Dixon?
Ralph Dixon was a great outfielder for many teams, the Hilldale Giants and the Harrisburg Giants and the Hilldale Giants, Pittsburgh Crawfords, outstanding outfielder. Part of the outfield with Oscar Charleston and Fats Jenkins. Just an outstanding ball player year round. Statistically, he is among the leaders. There's so much I can say about Rap. Just a very underrated ball player. And I think he finished 3rd on the 1952 Pittsburgh Carrier all-time team. One of the best outfielders to ever play. So there's so many ball players, and I don't know if we have enough time to even talk about Rap Dixon and the greatness that he brought to the game.
Gary, was he a power hitter or more of a contact hitter?
He was a power hitter, yeah, but he hit for good average too. So he was really an elite offensive force. I think he was right up there in the late 20s and early 30s with the best hitters in the black game. People like Judd Wilson, Oscar Charleston, and others. John Beckwith, yeah. So yeah, he was middle of the lineup, on really good teams like the Baltimore Black Sox in 1929, who were champions. Yeah, so really good player.
Perhaps one of the reasons he's not yet been elected, overshadowed by Oscar Charleston?
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is he a lefty hitter or a righty?
Righty.
Right and right.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to tell from this photo because it's only from about mid chest up, but he looks like he had a relatively thin build.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
Yeah, he was pretty stocky. One of the problems, not the problem, but one of the negatives with Rap Dixon is he died at 41.
Mhm.
And so he
Yeah.
never got a chance to talk about his career, or people didn't get a chance to interview him because he died at such a young age.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And that's to his detriment.
Yeah. Final question on him. Why was he called Rap?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think it's, well, I'm not sure, but I think it may come from the Rappahannock River, but I'm not sure. I actually probably shouldn't shouldn't say that for sure. I think Ted Knorr would know that. So
Yes, Ted would
he's
know.
sort of a big Rap Dixon proponent.
Yeah,
Yeah, just
Ted's
a
one of
little
my
bit.
Facebook friends. He's probably commenting as we speak. Actually, he is commenting in our chat. Theodore Knorr, as he calls himself in the chat, Charleston considered Dixon the best African-American outfielder he ever saw, and the nickname dates from his hitting in high school, the way I guess he wrapped the
Okay.
ball. So that
Okay.
makes sense.
Okay. There you go.
Rap out
cue.
some hits.
Yeah, that's right. On cue, Ted comes up with a good answer there. Here's another interesting player from, I believe, the 19th century, if I'm not mistaken, Grant Home Run Johnson. Gary, let's begin with you.
Yeah, actually 19th century and on into the 1900s and the 19 teens. He was he was probably the best black position player between around the mid 1890s and around 1910, when John Henry Lloyd and Pete Hill really come into their own. He played on basically every top black team during that time. That was before the Negro Leagues, of course, so these were independent teams, but he played for the Page Fence Giants, very famous team in the 1890s, traveled in the Midwest. The Cuban X Giants of the early 1900s, alongside Rube Foster and others. The Philadelphia Giants of 1905, which are kind of a common, lots of people remember them as one of the great teams of the time. The Brooklyn Royal Giants from 1906 to around 1909, 10. He was the 1909, I think. He was the best player on that team and the captain / manager of it. He played for the 1910 Leland Giants, which is another one of the great teams, alongside Lloyd and Hill and Foster and other great players. He played on the 1913 Lincoln Giants, which is another great team with actually Joe Williams and Dick Redding that we mentioned earlier, Louis Santop, so all Hall of Famers on that team. He also had a great career in Cuba, which is maybe a little bit under recognized for him. He actually played in the Cuban League for several years, led the Habana team to a championship, played alongside a lot of the same people actually that he did in the US. So Pete Hill and John Henry Lloyd, and his statistics there actually, which are very well capped. Like it's very the statistics are very reliable there. Show that he was still in his mid to late 30s in Cuba, playing in a league that sometimes featured white major leaguers and also playing against white major league teams. He was still a dominant player. He was a shortstop through most of his career. He moved to second base by that time, especially when he played on teams with Lloyd, who kind of took his place as shortstop. But he was still a dominant player at an elite level in his mid to late 30s, and had a huge impact on the game. He was just one of the biggest stars. He wrote the chapter on hitting for Saul White's 1907 baseball guide.
Larry, there's of course a Hall of Famer, Home Run Baker, even though he didn't hit a lot of home runs.
Right.
How about Grant Home Run Johnson? Did that home run nickname come because he hit a lot of home runs, or was it another reason?
Well, he did. He hit 60 home runs around about 1893, 94. 60 home runs for a team called Finlay Sluggers.
Wow.
But this was during the dead ball era. But as Gary said in wrapping this up, and when Saul White put out his official baseball guide on colored baseball in 1907, he asked two people to write chapters. And one was Rube Foster on how to pitch, and he asked Grant Home Run Johnson to write a chapter on how to hit. So I put him up there with Rube Foster. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And he hit a home run with me many years ago, and somehow he missed the cut in 2006.
Yeah. One more anecdote about him. He actually around, I think it was before the 60 home run season, maybe the year before or something. He was playing for the Finley team. He hit 2 home runs in a game off of Tony Mullane in a game against the Cincinnati Reds. So it was a game against a white major league team. A pitcher who's often mentioned for the Hall of Fame himself. And Johnson was, I think, probably only 20 years old at the time. So 2 home runs in one game, the early 1890s. It's probably the first time that a black player had done that off of a white pitcher, at least that I'm aware of. So
now was Finlay an integrated team?
It was. They had Johnson and Bud Fowler played for that team as well.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty good starting point right there. Let's talk about Dick Lundy, a player. I've certainly heard of him. I don't know probably as much as I should. Shortstop, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. In June, I sent out a query to the Sabre community to list the 101 notable Negro League players, and Dick Lundy was the only one that was voted on every ballot. Great shortstop, part of that $1 million infield by the Baltimore Black Sox in 1929. There's so much we could talk about Dick Lundy, but he's a very underrated ball player and deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
Was he a player better known for defense or for his hitting?
Both.
Both.
When you look at the great shortstops, you have Papa Lloyd first, Willie Wells second, and then Dick Lundy. So, and of course, you can include Grant Home Run Johnson as the first great shortstop of all time. But you go from Grant Home Run Johnson to Papa Lloyd to Willie Wells to Dick Lundy. Outstanding ball player, brilliant mind. He managed a few teams later in his career. So lots of good stats will support that.
Yeah. All right, Gary, I'm going to put you on the spot here. The cap that he's wearing, do you know what team that is?
That's the Newark Eagles, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah,
you know your stuff. Very good. Newark Eagles. Did he play for F. Manley and Abe Manley?
Yeah.
He did. All right. Very good. We have a few more players we want to get to. This man played third base. Great nickname, the Ghost, Oliver Marcel. Let's begin with Gary.
Oh, Oliver Marcel. Well, usually in the sort of teens, 20s, early 30s, there were 3 third basemen in the Negro Leagues that were sort of grouped together as the 3 greatest. Well, actually 2 at that point. It was Judy Johnson and Oliver Marcel. Usually Ray Dandridge, who played later, is usually added to them as like the three greatest third basemen. He was a great defensive player. I think as a hitter, he wasn't an overpowering hitter, but he was good. He's somebody who played for a bunch of really important teams, including in Cuba. The uniform you see there is the Santa Clara Leopardos, who are considered sort of the 27 Yankees of Cuban baseball history. It was the 1923-24 winter season. They were this great team. They were so good that they won the league going away. In fact, they stopped the league early because they were so far ahead and took the worst team out, redistributed those players among the other 2 teams, not Santa Clara, then started a new competition, and Santa Clara went and still won that. So, and Oliver Marcel was actually the batting champion, I believe, that year. So he was on a team. That Santa Clara team was completely loaded. It had Dobie Moore and Bill Holland and Oscar Charleston, all kinds of great players on that team. So, but Marcel was the batting champion.
Yeah. Any idea from either of you why he was called the Ghost?
Yes, because he moved so fast they couldn't see him.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a great ball player, underrated.
Mhm.
Finished first in the 1952 Pittsburgh Carrier poll
Mhm.
as the greatest third baseman of all time. And unfortunately, he died at an early age of 53 in Denver, Colorado.
And that certainly can hurt a candidacy when you're not around to talk about yourself, in a sense, promote what you did as a ball player. A
Yes.
couple of other guys. You mentioned this man earlier, Larry, and a player that you've really grown an appreciation for. Great player with a terrific nickname, Cannonball Dick Redding. Tell us about Cannonball.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Cannonball was the equivalent of Smokey Joe Williams. They were considered the top aces of their era. They were really top tier pitchers before 1920. Smokey Joe Williams' career lasted into the 20s and early 30s, where Cannonball Dick Redding's career, his peak years were before 1930. So he didn't get the accolades that he deserved. Unfortunately, 10 years before he passed away at the age of 58, he was put into a mental institution, and he was never able to promote his career, and he kind of fell by the wayside. But when I started doing the statistical research on this man, he was the equivalent of any of the great ball players or the great pitchers that we have in the Hall of Fame today. He wasn't called Cannonball for nothing. So
Yeah.
he was an incredible journeyman who would pitch both ends of a doubleheader, and his one-loss record is off the charts. So we'll see what happens in December.
Just looking at this picture, I mean, the neck, he looks incredibly strong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
pretty big fella.
Yeah.
Mm.
What about your thoughts on him, Gary?
Oh, a great pitcher. I think if you'd gone back and asked fans of the black game in the 1920s, like who are the greatest pitchers in our history, I think they definitely have to put him up there. They would have said Rube Foster, Joe Williams, and Dick Redding. I'm sure of that. He was always paired with Williams. They were teammates a lot of years. That's probably why. And sometimes there were rivals too. So,
Yeah.
he was a very durable pitcher. He just pitched a lot, workhorse, like Larry was saying.
Mhm.
He had a great season in 1921 with the Bacharach Giants, which he was also managing at the time. And they traveled thousands of miles that year through the Midwest and played all of the Negro National League teams, as well as all the teams on the West Coast. And he compiled a pretty amazing record. I think we have him with 20 or 21 wins, something like that, for that year. But he, of course, pitched more games than what we have records for. So he was a workhorse and the possessor of a very intimidating fastball.
A few more names we want to talk about from the managerial perspective. Vic Harris. And here's a name that I knew about as a kid only because of his son, who was an infielder with the Rangers and the Chicago Cubs. I don't know if he's actually Vic Harris Jr., but that was the Vic Harris that I grew up with. But this was his father, Vic, a great manager. Tell us a little bit about him, Larry.
As far as managers, he should be in the Hall of Fame. He had about 10 years of managing the Homestead Graves, who won a Negro League World Series in 1943, 44, and 48. He also holds the record as the manager of the most All-Star teams in the East-West All-Star Classic. Better than average outfielder, better than average hitter, but I think he should go into the Hall of Fame as a manager because of his long range with the Homestead Grays. They were always in the run when he was at the helm. Very underrated overall, and he got past a lot of our radars. And I think he needs a second chance. We need to go back and reevaluate his career and the greatness that he brought to the game.
Was he a player manager for most of his career?
Mostly a player, and he became a manager later. Yes, he was. I wouldn't say for most of his career. He had a long, extensive career that started in 1923 with the Cleveland Tate Stars.
Yeah.
So he goes back quite a ways, and he ended up playing, I think, in the late 40s with the Homestead Graves as a player manager.
Have either of you talked to his son?
No, I have not.
Okay. I'd be curious to hear what the younger Vic Harris would have to say, because I remember when the younger Vic Harris played, I never knew that his father had been associated with the Negro Leagues. That was something that didn't come into my awareness much later. Finally, we have two executives / owners. One that I'm somewhat familiar with, Gus Greenlee. The other I'm less so. That's Ed Bolden. Gary, if you would tell us a little bit about these two guys.
Sure. Well, Gus Greenlee is just a titanic figure in baseball history. He's first of all, he took over the Pittsburgh Crawfords, which were an amateur team, made them into a professional team and into maybe the best, like some people think the best Negro League team of all time. That's just getting started. Secondly, he founded the second Negro National League in 1933 and helped to preside over that for several years. And then thirdly, he also helped to found the East-West All-Star Game, which is just it's the biggest single event. It became the biggest single event in the Black baseball calendar in the 30s and 40s. So just for those three things, so those are just a tremendous impact on baseball history. And he also helped to found the United States League, which was kind of a rival league later in the 1940s, which also plays a role in various events at that time. Ed Bolden is another person who probably has similar impact, has similar impact to Gus Greenlee. He took over the Hilldale Club in the 19-teens, which already existed at the time, built them up into a top professional team by the early 20s. And he helped to found, he was involved actually with Rube Foster in kind of getting the original Negro National League organized. And their original idea was to have a Western circuit, in the Midwest, and then an Eastern circuit on the East Coast. Eventually what happened was that Ed Bolden and the owners of the Back Racks and other Eastern clubs decided to form their own league. So Ed Bolden became, essentially the founder of the Eastern Colored League, which was really the second major Black league in 1923. His team, Hilldale, was one of the great teams in Black baseball history. They won the first three pennants of the ECL. They were in the first World Series in 1924, lost to the Monarchs. 1925, they did get their revenge. They won the World Series. Yeah. But he continued as the head of Hilldale until the early 30s, lost control of that club, and then just started another one, the Philadelphia Stars, which also went on to become, a really important pillar of the second Negro National League. And they won the pennant in 1934 in an exciting series over the Chicago American Giants.
Right. So two more candidates that'll be considered by the Early Baseball Era Committee, and that meeting and the result of that vote coming up in early December. Final point, and I'm going to turn this over to Larry to talk a little bit about another upcoming event in 2022. This is a prestigious conference, the Jerry Malloy Negro League Conference, coming up in early June. I imagine both of you will be there, but Larry, tell us more about this event.
The Jerry Malloy Negro League Conference is, of course, named after the great 19th century historian Jerry Malloy. We do this symposium, an academic symposium, every year for the last 20 plus years. We took a sabbatical because of COVID, but we're coming back in June of 2022 in Birmingham. We have presentations by some of the top scholars in the country. We will go to the Negro Southern League Museum. Visit Rickwood Field, which is now the oldest major league ballpark in the country, older than Fenway, because of what happened in December with Major League Baseball accepting Negro League stats. So we will visit Rickwood Field, the Birmingham Civil Rights Institution, and the 16th Street Baptist Church. Some of the best minds and authors and players will be there. I welcome anybody to come and enjoy the festivities, and we always have a great time. I mean, if you want to know anything about the Negro Leagues, this is the place to be. We have such a great time. It's off the chart. I mean, please come.
Well, yeah, I've heard great things about this event. It sounds like a lot of fun, and it's a great learning opportunity. It's that first weekend in June 2nd to 4th, 2022, down at Birmingham, Alabama, and the opportunity to visit Rickwood Field. That's a nice incentive as well. I want to thank both Larry Lester and Gary Ashwill for joining us over the course of this past hour. Gentlemen, this has been great. We really appreciate your time and your wonderful insights into a subject of baseball research that just continues to grow. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Again, our guests have been Gary Ashwill, Larry Lester, talking about Negro Leagues baseball. I do want to thank our primary sponsor, the Ford Motor Company. They sponsor this program and all of our other virtual programs here at the Hall of Fame. So thank you to Ford Motor Company. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.